All right, welcome to the industry panel. This session is going to feature 4 professionals in the industry with different backgrounds to help paint a picture of education needed to pursue careers in aerospace, what these professional roles entail, some of the experiences that shape these careers, and more. The last portion of the session, we will address some questions from the audience, so feel free to chat those in. The industry panel, this session is going to feature 4 professionals. Sorry about that, technical difficulties. So feel free to chat in your questions and we'll address them at the very end. Today we've got Chris McCarthy, who's a programmer at ATC Manufacturing. Chris has 10 years of carbon fiber fabrication and repair with the U.S. Marine Corps airframe and power plant certified mechanic, is an AWS certified welder, has 3 years of machining and CNC programming experience at ATC. Outside of his real job, he is serving in the Idaho National Guard and he owns and operates a local microbrewery with his family. Next, we have Erica Jameson, who's a financial analyst at Plexus. Erica's been a financial analyst at Plexus for almost a year. She's originally from Las Vegas and moved to Idaho in March of 2020. She enjoys cooking and baking, and in the summer, loves spending time on the lake with family and friends. Next up, we've got Jordan Jerry, a manufacturing engineer at Unitech. Jordan has worked in the aerospace industry for almost a decade. He has worked on the manufacturing floor as a major supplier for Boeing, processing of raw materials like aluminum for a global corporation, and designing products for various customers. He enjoys spending time outdoors, working with his hands, and attending Washington State Cougar football games in Pullman. And lastly, we've got Rick Collins. He's a program manager at Altec. Rick is a career-long manufacturing professional, serving the last 8 years as program manager at Altec, Inc. His role focuses on business development and engineering support for aerospace clientele, primarily in commercial aircraft. His free time is spent enjoying the outdoors with his wife and kids, playing music and woodworking. So for the format of this panel, I'm just going to go ahead and ask these folks some questions. I'm going to ask you guys to take just 2 or 3 minutes to respond. And then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So first, I want to ask each of you if you could just give me a brief background on how you got into your position, into this line of work. I'll name you and have you give me your answer and then name the next person. Does that sound okay with you guys? Okay. So
sounds good.
Chris, would you give us some background on how you came into your role?
Quite by accident. I was attending North Idaho College, and I was planning on doing some machining on my own, like purchasing a CNC mill and just making parts and starting my own business. And I ran into, at a job fair, a gentleman from ATC, and he said, "Hey, a lot of your background, it seems like you know a lot about what we do here, and you're a Marine. Our boss is a Marine. Our ATC president is a retired colonel." So I just came in and chatted with them, and all the strange stuff that wouldn't make sense on anybody to a resume, he picked up on all that and said, I know what your value is with your background. We can use you here. You're going to school for machining, finish it up and come to work and do some work with us. And I dove right into it, jumped into my first project. Was a 5-axis project, machining to make window frames, which was completely new to me. And it was a steep learning curve, but it was doable.
Thanks so much, Chris. Jordan, why don't you go ahead and give us some background on how you came into your role?
Yeah, so I guess I'd just have to say I've probably been on this track to work in the aerospace industry since my junior year of high school. I was involved in another program, something similar to this, and I started off with that. I then attended college and I graduated from Washington State University with a BS in mechanical engineering, and some of the first jobs I applied to when I graduated were aerospace. So it's been like that ever since.
Got it, thanks. Rick, would you give us some background on how you came into the?
Yeah, out of school, I started work at Altec actually about 15 years ago, and I've been there ever since. Started off in the manufacturing floor. We're an injection molder mostly in a machining house. Worked on the floor, worked my way up eventually through supervisory roles and quality management roles, and now in the engineering department.
Great, thanks so much. Erica, all you.
Actually, very similar to Chris, is kind of accident for me. I'm originally from Las Vegas, Nevada, and I've only been here a little over a year. I've been with Plexus. Next week will actually be a year, but previously to working in the contract manufacturing industry, I was actually a financial analyst for the nightclubs at Wynn and Encore in Las Vegas. So completely different industry. But I mean, every company, regardless, needs people behind the scenes working the numbers and doing the financials. So when I moved to Idaho, I just happened to, I mean, it was mid-COVID, so that was kind of put a strain on it. But obviously, Idaho does not have nightclubs or like huge $5 billion hotels. So kind of just fell in my lap on accident. I just happened to be like looking at finance positions on LinkedIn, and I came across it. And it's very, very interesting industry, something I had never even thought about pursuing, but I'm so glad I did. It's always changing, it's fast paced, and I love it. But as far as how I got into my current role, it was kind of by accident, but it's a good thing for sure.
Okay, great. Actually, that kind of leads into my next question. So I'll start with you, Erica, on the next one. What are the misconceptions about this industry, or what were the misconceptions that you had prior to entering the industry that you hear often, or that you would clear up for in basic terms for somebody who would be questioning how you came into the role or the industry?
Yeah, I mean, for me, honestly, I had no idea what to expect. So Plexus, we don't only manufacture for aerospace and defense, but we are manufacturing for communications and healthcare and a lot of different types of industries that we're building for on the factory floor. So that's one thing. I honestly had no idea what I was getting myself into, but because of the different type of industries, and they're always changing depending on, the market and even like government ties to contracts. It's just always changing. But there's so much more to aerospace and defense, manufacturing than just what you think, just like building products on the floor. There is a whole, there's many different departments behind the scenes that are, booking those contracts, figuring out the financials, figuring out, how much we need to build. There's materials, there's just so many different aspects to manufacturing that I had no idea that even existed.
Yeah, definitely. Jordan, I'll ask you next what you would say those misconceptions about the industry are that you would want to address.
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception out there is that people think that aerospace is too technical or too hard, that there's a very high barrier of entry and it takes a lot of skill, a lot of knowledge, a lot of education to be able to make it, when it really doesn't, right? So aerospace is probably one of the most well-regulated industries out there, and one of the pieces is training. You can get trained on any part of building an airplane part or anything like that, from hand layup of a composite to assembly. I mean, they teach you everything that you need to know, and it really is an industry that's open to anybody out there.
Gotcha, thanks. Chris, I'll ask you next.
Sure, yeah. One of the misconceptions I think I found out for myself was moving from sort of the consumer side. I was in the aviation field in the Marine Corps, and we had parts that were from Bell Helicopter, Boeing, Sikorsky, and just seeing the quality of the parts, like thinking, I hope they have everything dialed in. And then actually coming to work into one of these factories and working mostly on the R&D side of the house, realized that it's haywire. And having any kind of background in hand tools, measuring equipment, financial, if you can get your feet wet and get into some Six Sigma side, get like a lean manufacturing, any information on that process flow. You don't have to be an engineer to step in and lean out a process. So just to be able to take this, customer says, hey, we need such and such a part. We have engineers designing molds and fixtures and the process in place to get it from raw material and out the door. It's constantly evolving. It takes the whole family to get it in and out, while following all the guidelines that are put in place. Like you follow ISO standards, and it takes 365 days of constant attention to make sure that you maintain that. And you can come in, kind of like Jordan says, at the ground level, like Rick's been doing it since day one, as boots on the floor, had his hands dirty, is doing work, working shift work, and you pick up all these little nuances. And just to say like, oh, I don't know anything about aviation or aerospace industry, you can start from anywhere in the process, and a lot of people don't realize that.
Awesome. Rick, I'll have you speak to this question as well, and then I've got a follow-up for you guys too.
Sounds good. Yeah, those are all good things. The only thing I would add to that is a lot of people think that it's all Boeing when you talk aerospace. That's basically all it is. And we're in Spokane right now, or at least I am. And there's a lot of aerospace manufacturers out here, like ATC and others. And like Erica was saying, personally speaking, at where I work, it's about 50% aerospace. We're a contract manufacturer as well, and we do medical and other things as well. So you can get involved with a sub tier. If you're with Boeing, obviously, yeah, that's going to be all aerospace. But there are sub tier suppliers that do a lot of other things too. And the other thing I would add is that there's a perception that aerospace work is a niche application. So if you get hired on at an aerospace company, your skills that you may acquire there may not be transferable, and that's absolutely not true.
Okay, and then I'll start with you, Rick. And my follow-up question is, like, what are those technical skills that are required for you to do your specific role?
Well, for mine, it's CAD, it's design, cost accounting, and basic business, principles and skills. And then for my industry as a manufacturer, there's some skills that are involved in knowledge that are specific to injection molding or machining. Sorry about that. As the other folks were mentioning, it's there's ample opportunity to be trained up in those skills too. So even if you don't come out of school with them, that's not a deal breaker.
Okay, great. Erica, can I ask you to speak to this next? Your role is a little bit different from everybody else's role in the session. So your skills that you use on a daily basis are probably slightly different than those folks that are in a more technical manufacturing setting. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. So for me, mine would be like GAAP, which is the general accepted accounting principles. Definitely like understanding of a P&L, which is a profit and loss statement, looking at a balance sheet, all the different things that, looking at the top line, how much we're building and selling to our customer, and then all the expenses in between. Then we get to the bottom, our operating profit. So really trying to understand where we can, cut some of those expenses and end up with a larger number at the bottom, because every dollar saved is the dollar to the bottom line. That's, what we say here in finance. But basically, a lot of my skills that I have that are directly tied to finance are things that I can take to many different companies as well. But like I was saying before, there's so many things that I didn't even think went into, aerospace, defense, or contract manufacturing as a whole that I had no idea. There's so many things that, that you look at when it comes to the financials.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, can I ask you to speak to this next? What those technical skills you use for your role are?
Absolutely. On a day-to-day basis, SolidWorks. My job is very SolidWorks heavy. So all of our parts models come in as either giant CATIA drawings that are put into SolidWorks. I do well, the majority of my computer-aided machining that's built into SolidWorks. Along with that, so like just basic computer skills, a little bit of math, a lot less than my math teacher would have had me believe. But I do use some a little bit of calculus for sine and cosine, but you don't have to be a math wizard. You know, you have a scientific calculator built into your phone that's at hand at all times. Along with that, precision measurement. So we use a lot of hand measuring tools, measuring stuff down to the tenths, like tenths of a thousandth of an inch, and that's industry wide. That's most of the tolerances that you'll be matched up against. You're looking down into 4 or 5 decimal places, if not more. And some of them, I'm sure, like some of the engine applications, is even greater tolerance. And basic hand tools on my side. I do a lot of fabrication for fixture work. So.
Yeah. Okay, great. Jordan, do you want to speak to this as well?
Yeah, I think the probably the biggest technical skill for me is being able to interpret engineering drawings and being able to create documentation that accurately reflects those drawings. So, you know, typically we'll get a package from a customer, say Boeing or Lockheed Martin or somebody, and you know, it's all engineering speak, lingo, things like that, and you have to interpret the geometric dimensioning and tolerancing and things like that to be able to create a document that can be easily read by somebody on the floor. And you know, that involves math, that involves precision measuring, like Chris said, and all of those pieces.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Kind of switching gears, I have another question for you guys, and I'll start with you, Jordan. What is the best and or the worst advice that you've been given in regards to your career or professional development?
I think the best piece of advice for me was when I first started out, right after graduating college, and I got into aerospace manufacturing. Somebody told me that I can gain the most amount of knowledge by the people who are already on the floor, the people who are already building parts, the people who are already laying up the different things we're building, and just to spend time working with them. I mean, it's very easy as an engineer coming onto a manufacturing floor thinking that you know everything because, you know, you went to college or whatever the case may be. But I can guarantee you, I did not know anything about the manufacturing we're doing or anything about our industry at that point. So learning from all the people that I was working with and being around really gave me the understanding of how to actually work in a manufacturing environment.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Rick, can I ask you next what the best and or worst advice you've received in regards to your career is?
Oh, that's a hard one to follow up. Jordan nailed it on the head. That was the same thing I think I learned firsthand. Not necessarily advice, maybe from somebody specifically, but firsthand experience would be that's the mistake that I made, was at some point assuming that I knew it all. I tell my kids that all the time, and they don't take that lesson from me, unfortunately. But yeah, I think I really don't have much to add. I think Jordan nailed it for me.
Okay, cool. Chris or Erica, do you guys have anything to add to that?
I sure do. My the best advice I ever got is bloom where you're planted. And basically, if you get stuck in some position where you're not sure that that's what you wanted, or hey, like Erica came up here, she didn't have the hotel industry there, and she saw a spot, she took the job, made the best of it, and then she can become outstanding in her field, pick up some skills that are transferable to another market, or even just to tack onto your resume. And don't be afraid to to try whatever it is you need to try, do whatever it needs to do. Pick up some collateral duties on the way, and it just makes you more well-rounded, and it just opens you up to more. Maybe you weren't sure what you were capable of, and pick up some new skills. I might enjoy this more, and you go on to continue down that path. As far as bad advice, I would say maybe someone saying that you can't do something unless your specific job requires a title or some kind of certification attached to it, don't say that you can't, because I work in an engineering field without having completed my engineering degree. Now, I'm not stepping on any of their toes, but they do approach me for information on a daily basis, and we work well together. I think there's like kind of a really short anecdote. There was a car stereo amplifier company out of Arizona. The guy's father started it, and this kid grew up working there, building electronics parts, didn't finish high school, and he went on to be handpicked by Microsoft, or not Microsoft, IBM, whoever made the processors. But he went on to make the motherboard power supplies because of how efficient his car stereo amplifiers were. He wound up in like a $250,000 a year spot as the lead engineer. Intel, that was the company. But yeah, not an engineer. He plowed through it. He learned the parts that he needed to learn, and he did it. I mean, going through the education is probably the better choice, but you can always continue learning, like as a lifelong goal. I'm 42 years old. I still go to college, pick up more classes, just because I want to know more things.
And I would have to, yeah, I'd have to agree with Chris there about the bloom where you're planted. More specifically to my role, I have my degree in finance, and I worked in finance in Vegas, and I came here and I looked for a finance position. I got it. Now working at Plexus, I have so many opportunities to move around within the company, and they make sure it's known. They ask you, are you interested in possibly exploring other departments within Plexus? And, at first, when I first got the position, I never thought that, but I never really thought about diverting from finance. But now that I'm kind of seeing how the different departments work, like we have schedulers that schedule the builds based off when they need to be done and when they're going to ship. We have a shipping department. We have program managers that are, direct facing with the customers. And a lot of the different people at Plexus have been there many years. So there's a lot of room for opportunity to grow within that company. And a lot of the people that are currently program managers or customer directors were previously in the finance role at some point, or vice versa. So there is a ton of opportunities. So the bloom where you're planted is definitely good advice that I kind of received too, specifically starting at Plexus within my role.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, kind of switching gears, I am wondering if you guys can all speak to the greatest challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis, or what's the greatest challenge that you typically face in your specific role or position. Maybe I'll start with you, Chris, if you want to tell us what challenges you usually face, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. One of my biggest challenges doing research and development, I get handed a Rubik's Cube of a part, and they say, hey, we need to make this on a machine. So it's basically taking a whole chess game and working it backwards just to figure out how to approach machining a specific part, how to hold it, how to shift it around while you're machining it, and which tooling to use, and then which feeds and speeds. We make a pretty wide selection of materials here, so certain tools don't work specifically as well cutting one material versus the other. So if we have a part that we have to make a one-off, it might not be too difficult, but if we're trying to lean a process out and make 100 of the same part, I want to take as few steps, as few setups as possible. So it's kind of a mental arm wrestling with a robot and trying to get it to be as efficient as possible, and at the same time being able to hand that part off to the production side of the house with a simple set of instructions and have them be able to follow that. It can take all sorts of crazy steps using complex process, but if I can't hand that off in an efficient manner and have it hit at a production line or assembly line, then that's not going to work for business, especially not in this day and age when we need it fast and we need a lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan, would you speak to the challenges that you face next?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest challenge that I have is creating a manufacturing document that every person in our factory can understand. It's my job to take the engineering that we're given to our customer, which is typically just a drawing with a couple of specification documents that tell you how to do certain things. But then I have to create, essentially an IKEA instruction book on how to build a part from start to finish. And I could have anybody who's been at our company for 30 years building the part, or somebody who has come in through the door and they've only been here for 3 days build a part. So trying to write a document so that everybody can understand it and everybody can follow it across all the different areas of our facility is probably the hardest thing I deal with.
That makes sense. Rick, would you speak to what challenges you face next?
Yeah, I think for me, and it might be unique with my position here with the company I work for, but it's the diversity. I can relate to Chris and Jordan both with what they just mentioned. That's things that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. Also the customer interaction and the business management and development side of things as well. So for me, it's being able to wear a lot of hats and multitask and not be bad at any one thing, just be hopefully good and sufficient at all of them.
Yeah, totally. Erica, what about you?
Yeah, for me, having a different role than Chris, Rick, and Jordan when it comes to the manufacturing, me being on the behind the scenes part of it. For me specifically, coming into the role, and something I still, have a challenge with is probably just understanding some of the lingo and understanding, how the builds come together, and then the processes that, even just talking about the labor processes on the floor with some of what some of them are called, solder joints and all these different things. It's more just the lingo for me at this point. But I look back when I started a year ago, coming in knowing absolutely nothing about contract manufacturing. I know that I've definitely learned a lot, and I continue to learn, but it's just a never-ending learning experience. But that's what makes it, fun, is it never gets boring, and I'm always continuing to learn and grow. So I would say that's the most challenging as of right now, just being, behind the scenes and doing the financials for it. But it is something that, it is a constant learning experience.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that probably regardless of where you work and what your role is or your position is, there's always going to be a huge learning curve every time we move into a new position. So that's definitely a good thing, and kind of brings me to the next question, which is basically the opposite of the last, which is what's the greatest benefit that you have in your current role? What's the best part? What's the greatest benefit that you have? So I'll start with you again, Erica, if you want to.
Yeah, I would say the biggest benefit is the fact that I am learning so much, and that I am never bored, and I honestly like a challenge. So the fact, and not only that, it's very fast paced. So I never ever get always challenged, but all those things are good things.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Rick? What's the greatest benefit of your current role? Oh, maybe he's frozen.
It's hard to. Am I frozen? Am I okay?
I think you're good. I think I was the problem.
Oh yeah, it's there's always. Okay. It's anyway. There's a continual, introduction of new technologies or new designs or new things to go over. You get to be involved with some really cool projects. I mean, we don't make turbine parts or anything that fancy, but I mean, oxygen delivery valves, wastewater systems, and things that on the surface don't sound that fun or that interesting. You break them apart, and in the aerospace world, even flushing a toilet is complicated. So there's always a challenge that way.
Definitely. What would you say, Chris?
Biggest benefit for me is someone who is, even before I had this job, was interested in machining and CNC world, is getting to see some of the, like, being on the, no pun intended, on the cutting edge of technology, seeing some of the new tooling and some of the new machines come out, and being able to use them, and not having to foot the bill. I treat them like they're my own, but my equipment at home isn't even a quarter of the standards or the quality. But just being able to be a part of this emerging field of the newest manufacturing techniques, it's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And lastly, you, Jordan, what would you say?
I would definitely have to agree with everybody. There's always a new challenge every day, and there's always something to work on, something to figure out how to make happen. And it's something like being able to build parts for Air Force One, or the F-15 or the B-2 bomber. You get to work on very cool aircraft and things like that, and help the customer solve problems that they didn't know they had.
Awesome. And I just we don't have a lot of questions coming through in the chat, so I just want to remind everybody who's tuning in to feel free and type in their questions. We do have a little bit of a delay between our live stream, so feel free to type in some questions as they come up so that I can get those addressed while I have these folks here. But I'll move on to the next question, which is, a few of you guys have talked about the growth opportunities that you have experienced in your current roles. I'm wondering if you could talk about what growth opportunities that you have from the role that you're in, and maybe speak to how you grew from previous roles. I'll have you start, Chris, if that works for you. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, I actually came into this factory at this picture behind me, blanking out the boring white wall. But that's a machine. We take raw sheets of carbon fiber, and it's embedded with thermoplastics, and press it into like glass hard sheets of carbon fiber that we in turn make our parts from. But I initially got hired and didn't have a spot for me in the machining side, so they bought this machine. It's one of 4 in this country, I think, and it was like, hey, can you help us put this together while we work on a new project, and we can have you start machining? And sure, this thing is, it's basically a helicopter without blades. You got pneumatics, hydraulics, electronics. Like, sure, I'll take a look at it. And wound up being the only one that's still at this company that knows the ins and outs of it and the guts of it. So when we do have issues with it, and I have to be the liaison between the company out in Germany and go out on the floor and become the maintenance man, then moving over to the machining side of the house, and then into R&D, working hand in hand with our quality assurance department, working with our project managers, having a say in how a process is gonna operate, which in turn changes how a budget is going to be forecast for raw materials coming in, fixturing and tooling, and just to be able to go from somebody who came in knowing nothing to moving on and shaping the way that the company is going to approach an entire project. Same way we have a new company coming in saying they want to make parts for something that's going to be launched into space, and now I have a voice in saying how that project is going to happen, and my input is valued, and that's a pretty good feeling. So to be able to start from ground one, move up to be a project manager like Rick did, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually going to go to Rick next and see if you could speak to the growth that you've experienced and the growth opportunities that are ahead of you.
Oh yeah, so in the past, I guess to where I got today, would be another thing you could touch on about misconceptions about aerospace is I started off with really no skills that pertain to what I do now. And just within the organization itself that I work for, worked my way up, and as positions came available, applied for them and got them. But the, moving forward, in the company I'm at now, I think the next spot up would be senior management. And then, well, if I could own it, but that would take a lot more money than I currently will ever make. So, but there's moving on from, stepping to other, similar roles to other companies, program managers or customer managers and some of the roles similar to that, that other organizations title them. Even for me, because similar to Chris, I never finished my degree, actually, the irony of talking to a bunch of college students. But the work history I have found is still applicable. So, touching on that subject real quick is even getting, a degree in, say, engineering or something. I know a lot of colleagues who work at Boeing or other places that, they have a degree today, but they ended up started working for a company and they found they liked something better. They went to be a commodity manager or a purchasing manager or whatever. And so there's ample growth opportunity even within some of these larger corporations. For me, I work for a smaller mom and pop shop, so to speak, so it's a little bit different. But even in the more structured corporations, I've seen a lot of folks change rough career paths, but stay in the same industry and advance significantly.
Jordan, would you be able to speak to the growth that you've experienced and growth opportunities ahead of you?
Yeah, so I started out as a manufacturing engineer at my first company out of school. So my primary responsibility was being the engineer on the floor when a technician or a worker had a problem or had a question. It was, I was the firefighter on the front line to make sure that they got a question answered right away so that they could keep doing their job and we weren't slowing down the line or not moving product. After that, I shifted into a new product introduction engineer. So I was in charge of interpreting all those documents from the customer and getting brand new products in our facility out the door, start to finish, writing documentation so people can understand how we build it, why we build it, and all of those pieces. And now I am a program engineer. So on top of doing all of that, working with the people on the floor, creating the documentation, I also interface with the customer. So I am the front line for the customer on the engineering side. So whenever there's a technical issue with Boeing or somebody else, their engineering team calls me first so we can work through it to figure out how can we fix the problems that they have. With my role now, I think the progression for me is either, moving into management as an engineering manager or something like that, or I can follow a more technical side and become a chief engineer. So that involves a little more schooling, a little more knowledge in our products and different pieces like that. But I actually have two paths in front of me that I could take.
Awesome. And Erica, I'll ask you next. We do have a couple questions that came in from some students and we only have a few minutes left. So we're probably going to try to power through a couple of questions really fast.
Okay. Yeah, I think I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier about how the company that I work for specifically, there are many different opportunities to, move around within the company depending on, what you're interested in. And, not always when you start a role, do you see yourself doing the same thing for 20 plus, even more years. So the company that I work for is really great with being able to accommodate, different desires to try out different roles. As far as my growth in the last year within the finance field, I feel like I've grown a lot. And my next step would, if I wanted to stay within the finance field, I could be a senior financial analyst and then even be a site controller or assistant controller. But there are many different opportunities, like the others were saying, to kind of move around within program management, scheduling, production planning, materials. So there's a lot of different opportunities to move around.
Awesome. Sounds like there's lots of diversity and versatility too, which is really great. Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple questions that we got from the students. The first question comes from Kimberly, and she's asking, what do you believe is the most beneficial piece of knowledge you had before entering your field? Is there any commonality in what you all may have known before entering your fields? And we've kind of spoken about this as far as like what's the best advice you've given, but if you could sum that up into a sentence. Chris, do you have an answer for that?
Mine really only fits my career path. I went to school. I had to have an English degree, and then I went and joined the Marine Corps because I didn't want to look at books anymore. And the way that the Naval Aviation program is set up, it mirrors ISO 9000's qualifications and that certification. So having all that background made it a lot easier to step into an ISO 9001 company, because I was familiar with the way that it was audited and the same processes that are in place for aviation. So that's that wouldn't be a common one. I think some of anything that would be common in my field now would be SolidWorks or whatever career path you're looking for, be it some kind of engineering. Make sure that you're well versed in what you can do with your computer, whether it's some kind of graphics or software or modeling or CAD. That would be a huge bonus for you.
Okay, great. Rick, I'll ask you if you have a piece of knowledge that you felt was super beneficial before entering your field, and then I'll have Erica and Jordan answer the last question at the very end.
Yeah, similar to Chris, I think CAD design in the engineering side is a must. Maybe to add something slightly different is familiarity, at least familiarity with regulatory requirements, knowing how to read a specification and actually understand it. That's probably the one that I see the least coming through out of either applicants coming out of college or just even out of the industry. At our level, understanding and being able to digest and interpret and basically translate a lot of the legalese that you'll see and again, the regulatory documentation is a big help.
Awesome. Okay, and then the last question comes from Carla. If you could, would you change anything about your trajectory from school to where you are now? Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. Erica, would you answer that first?
For me, I don't think so. I got my degree in finance, and I think it's, I'm able to use that in many different industries, whether it's working at the nightclubs in Vegas, doing the finance for that, or working at a, contract manufacturing factory. So for me, I thought getting my finance degree was what was great for me.
Great. And Jordan, what would you say to Carla about if you would change anything about your trajectory?
I will say for me, I am very lucky for the path that I ended up on. I went to school, I found a job in aerospace, and I've continued ever since. But that's not to say that that's your path. Everybody has a different way to get to where they want to be. It just has to be whether you're passionate and determined about it.
Great. I think both of those are great answers. We're actually coming to the very. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it kind of goes on with the good advice, bad advice. My parents always told me, like, hey, you have to do something, or you can be anything you want. And then so I said, hey, I'm going to go to college. I don't know what to do. I just picked what the guidance counselor told me to do. Said, hey, you can do anything you want. But nobody ever told me you have to do something. So I didn't pick until I was an adult. So if you have some kind of dream, some kind of hope in mind, or something that you really enjoy, take that, turn it into a skill, turn it into a marketable skill, and probably get greater success earlier in life that way. You have to be something.
Yeah. Rick, would you add anything to that, or?
No, you guys said it better than I can, so.
Awesome. Okay, so we are coming to the very end of this session. Thank you guys for being a part of this. I really appreciate your time, and we'll see you in the next session.
Sure. been a pleasure.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.